Hey, Mark, thanks for hanging out with me today on the Vineyard Underground podcast.
Well, hey, Fritz. Good to be here.
How's it going? Yeah, how's it going, man? What are you doing?
It's going great. I'm sitting at my desk, but I'd rather be outside right now.
Yeah, and
it's
tell
sunny
me
and stuff's happening.
Tell me where your desk is now. Where are you located?
Right now, I have two desks, but right now I'm at the desk in Templeton, California, which is near Paso Robles, as they say around here. I also have a desk up there in Sonoma County, but right now I'm spending my time about 60% down here in the Central Coast and about 40% up north, and that may even change a little bit going forward, but I'm planning on spending a lot more time here in the Central Coast, where it's really dry usually, except for this year.
So let's expand on that here a little bit first. Maybe you can start by just explaining in your terms, what is deficit irrigation? Let's presume we're talking about mature vines that are established, that are in full production.
Yeah. So the term deficit irrigation is often misused, and even I misuse it. But really, with the true definition of deficit is just what it sounds like. You apply less than it's withdrawing. I'm sorry. Yes. That. Let's
go with that. Less than it's withdrawing.
You apply less water than the vineyard or vine is taking out, and in so doing, you were allowing the soil moisture to decline over time, and then when you do that, the vine has to pull harder to extract that moisture, which is a stress on the vine. So deficit irrigation itself is not a stress, but deficit irrigation leads to stress in the plant. Any plant, but we're talking about grapevines, and we're talking about mature grapevines, like you said.
Yeah.
So what we want to do is apply a certain amount of water stress to the grapevine during certain phenological stages, certain growth phases, or developmental phases of the fruit. We don't always want to have the vines under stress. And a lot of people have been kind of going back and forth on what we should do. I kind of been doing this for over 30 years now, and a lot of that time has been research, but a lot of it also has been practical. So I think I have a pretty good handle on when we want to stress the vines and when we don't. But that's how we do it. We either are irrigating at a lower amount of applying less water than the vines are extracting, so that over time the soil moisture declines, or we don't irrigate at all. In many cases in the North Coast, where we get a lot of rainfall, that's what we're doing. We're not irrigating at all.
Right.
We're letting the vines tap out all the moisture that the rain has given us during the winter and spring. Now, in a more arid region like where I am now, irrigation usually starts. This is a little bit different of a year because we had big rain this year, but normally we don't in the Central Coast. And so we were irrigating, but then we irrigate less than we otherwise would, to get that stress, induce that stress in the vine.
So let's start with soil moisture, and maybe we could just go into what you look for there briefly.
Well, soil moisture is my bread and butter. I use that word already today, but it's my go-to. It has become that way. It wasn't always that way. When I first started doing this, I wasn't using soil moisture, and largely because it was kind of not really explained to me, and maybe no one really had figured it out how to use them. But now, and I started using them in 2010. So it's not, I've only been using them for 13 years now. But I fully believe if I had one tool to do all this, I'd use the soil moisture sensors. Yeah. I use the water, so they're water content sensors, and we call them probes because they have multiple sensors within this little rod that gets stuck in the ground and left there essentially permanently or relatively permanently. Mm-hmm. And we're measuring the soil moisture continuously. So it's measuring it every 15 minutes or every half hour or hour, whatever we have it set at. And we're looking at not just the level of water, but we're looking at the trends. So how is the water declining? And we can see how the water is without charts. It's a little fuzzy to explain, but we can see when the water is being depleted rapidly, that there's lots of water available and the vines are getting it just fine. But that starts to I say flatten out, to level off over time, meaning the vines are not getting the water that easily. They're having a hard time getting it. They may be looking at it at different levels, which is why we use these multi-level probes. The ones we use typically have 6 depths, so they're looking usually between 8 inches to 48 inches of depth. They do have shorter ones, we do have longer ones, but that's kind of our go-to is the 48. Usually it captures what most of our root systems are or lie within. And I look at those look to not only tell me where's their water, where's the active roots, because we can actually see where active root uptake is and where active root uptake isn't. But we can also look at so what's in the tank. It kind of tells us a little bit more about what's in the tank. But then we can look at that data and see that when we irrigate, the level goes up, of course, it goes up. But we can precisely see how long it takes to get back to the same point where we started before that irrigation. And so that takes all the guesswork, in my opinion, and I guess I have an educated opinion, but it takes all the guesswork out of how much and how often, because I can irrigate so that water, I can see the water going down the profile. I don't want it to go past the root system. I want it to stay within the root system, so I can use that tool to determine how many hours to irrigate. And then beyond that, I can take that chart and tell me how often, because I can find out when the moisture level comes from back down to where, like I said, before I irrigate, and I'll irrigate again, push it back up. Now, if I want a deficit irrigate, I can stretch the irrigation out and let the soil moisture decline. Or if I want to bring the water content back up, I can irrigate in shorter intervals and have that kind of work its way up. And when I say up, I mean more water content. So to me, looking at underground has opened up really, to me, it's half the world that the vine's experiencing. It's above ground, there's below ground. In the below ground part, if you're not measuring soil moisture, you're really guessing. And that's kind of what I did for half my career, or more than half.
You mentioned vapor pressure briefly. So are there any go-tos that you find are highly valuable that you always want to have on your dashboard?
Well, I mean, the default is evapotranspiration. So ET. And that's kind of what I started using as an irrigation consultant, as ET, evapotranspiration, which is a model based on weather data. And the weather data is solar radiation, wind speed, temperature, and humidity. I think those are the main ones. Those feed into this model, and it's an estimate of water use of a reference crop. And then we have to throw in a bunch of fudge factors. And those fudge factors were, it kind of lost me because I think it's still, generally speaking, an overestimation of how much water our grapevines are using. But that is the default. That's an important one. I don't use it. I know people who do.
Okay.
That's fine. If you want to use that, but I still think the soil probe's telling me most of what I need. So, but as far as weather data goes, I'm looking at forecasts largely. How's it going? What's going to happen? Not what just did or what is now. Because I want to know if it's going to be hot and dry. I might want to irrigate a little extra if my tank is a little empty. And VPD is important, but it doesn't really affect irrigation that much. So VPD is vapor pressure deficit. Is really relative humidity kind of related. It's very related to relative humidity. The lower the humidity, the higher the vapor pressure deficit. Mm-hmm. That means the more vapor the air wants or can accept, which is going to drive your transpiration higher. That can be a direct effect on fruit because fruit don't have stomata, not active anyway, mm-hmm. and they can't control their water use. And very high VPD, which we've had here in California in the last few years, some really severe low VPD, high temperatures. which causes berry desiccation, which is usually something that kind of, it really screws up your whole year.
Yield wise and quality wise.
Both. There's not a whole lot you can do about it though. So irrigation at that point really isn't going to save you. There are a lot of people who start that's the mistake a lot of people make, is they start pouring on water. It doesn't really do anything beneficial. At that point, you just basically have to harvest it, because once fruit starts desiccating, that means it's disconnected from the parent vine. At that point, it's not going to get rehydrated from irrigation. So
right.
So when people are looking at other aspects, this gets beyond irrigation, but like, shade cloth, sprinklers to try to cool fruit. I guess you could call that an irrigation, but the idea is not to wet the soil, it's to wet the fruit.